when we start to build the product backlog, to understand really what the product backlog is trying to do for us, it's good to think about how we build things. Because when we build things, we always build things in some kind of sequence. That is, we do one thing first, then another thing, then another thing. And our habit is to try to do as much as we possibly can. Here's a typical little 4-step process. Step A, step B, step C, and step D. And let's say each step has a natural capacity to move stuff through it. So I'll assign values here. 10 for step A, 11 step B, 8 for step C, and 10 for step D. And so what we normally do is we normally try to shove in as much as we possibly can. We take this 10 in here, and we're going to say, because A can do 10, we're going to start shoving 10 right into this process. So we shove the 10 in there, and then we get another batch of 10 ready to go, and we keep shoving these things through as we move along. But what happens when we get to 8 there? Notice what's happening. We're starting to form a queue at 8, because step C can't take 10 units. It can only take 8 units. And so we have to take a few and leave them behind. A queue starts to form. And as we continue, that queue continues to grow. As each one comes shoving through 10 at the beginning, that queue continues to grow. And it grows, and it gets longer and longer. Now, what happens in real life is we're working on this, something strange happening. Some important thing comes along and says, I want to be done next, right? There's a fire that has to happen, and we have to do that thing next. Well, are we going to wait for it as it moves through the process and put it at the end of that queue? No, we're not going to leave it at the end of that queue, are we? To wait its turn to come through. We're going to do a process called expediting. We're going to take that and move it around to the front of the queue. But unfortunately, the moment we move to the front, we have to stop what we were doing before and switch to work on this new thing, which slows us down even more. Now we're only doing 7 units, and the queue gets longer. This is lowering our throughput. We're delivering things slower because of this queue. The second thing that happens that we see often is that we'll get a new item at the back, and it's fine. It's not a rush job. It'll wait its turn. And as it works its way down the queue, world is changing around us. So by the time it gets to the bottom of this queue, it starts to go kind of moldy. It's kind of ugly looking, right? It's all kind of green and nasty. Well, that means, we got to go back and rework it through our entire process again. So we take it around and we expedite it. Now it's the expedited thing, which again lowers our throughput. But all that work we did the first time has become waste. That is, we've wasted a ton of stuff. And so how do we deal with this? Well, one way that we found that's good to deal with this is, we want to start with 10, but you know what? Instead of shoving 10 into A, we're going to create the backlog before we even start the work. That means that this backlog that we have now, because we're going to have a queue because we can only do 8 at a time, but this backlog has a very low investment. That is, the amount of work we put into it is just a sorting function. We haven't done steps A and step B before we create the backlog. We're creating the backlog early in the process. And this early backlog, this low investment backlog, or queue, gives us the best throughput at the lowest possible waste. Right? This is queuing theory from the theory of constraints. And the people that created the product backlog said, we need to do this because we don't want to invest a ton of work in a big upfront specification that has huge investment where we've tried to figure out what this is all about. We'd rather have a product backlog that has a very low investment. So when we think about the product backlog, we're thinking about a low investment that has flexible features and can handle design uncertainty because we haven't changed a lot. We haven't got a lot of time and money invested into it. Right? So this is what a product backlog kind of looks like. Our backlog starts with, the product backlog is what we call the whole thing, but we can separate that into some views. And those views we often call release backlogs. Release backlogs is just enough of the backlog I want to see that I'm going to actually deliver as a shippable product at some point. But the basis of all the backlog are the backlog items themselves. The backlog item is the unit on the backlog. Once we take those backlog items as product owners, we get to define that. We give it to the team, they'll take that backlog item and break it into tasks later on in the sprint backlog. But the product backlog is mostly made of backlog items, which we can create views called release backlogs. Every backlog item can be broken into tasks by the team to work on. As we look at the backlog composition here, you can see that at the top of the backlog, I have what I call ready stories. These stories are high investment stories. We think we're actually going to build, and so we'll put the work into finding all the acceptance criteria on them 2 to 3 sprints out typically. That is, we'll have that much, we're willing to invest that much because the risk of not building something 2 or 3 sprints out is pretty low. In the middle of the backlog, we'll only have a moderate investment. I'll have the user story description and maybe 1 key acceptance criteria in the moderate backlog area. So I get a sense of how big it really is. And at the bottom is going to be my low investment queue, the rest of the queue. Here's where I just have the user story description and maybe just name the scale but not pick any points on it yet. Something I'm going to be watching for, and that's all I put on the bottom. Maybe I don't even name the scale, because I may not ever build these, so I don't want to invest them in learning about how they actually work.